Sitting within the center of our solar system, 93 million miles from Earth, a blazing ball of hydrogen, helium, and small amounts of metals and other gases, carries the planets within its grasp from being rogue bodies left on their own to wander the cold void of space. Burning at 5,778 degrees Kelvin, its turbulent nature appears calm from a distance. Its volume would encompass 1.3 million Earths, and it would take an astounding 330,000 times the mass of our planet to match its capacity. Nuclear fusion pushes atoms of hydrogen into each other. With such an incredible force, they become another element called helium, and the amount of energy generated from this process within its core gives us light. It represents 99.86% of the mass of our solar system. Classified as a yellow dwarf, this star travels around the Milky Way at a speed of 447,000 miles per hour. No other orb is a perfect sphere, yet this body of light is the closest found in nature. Our Sun has an 11-year cycle, which goes through a calming and peaking of events. But there are larger cycles in which we are only at the onset of understanding. Recent events suggest we need to place more attention to the source which our ancestors were certain had created life. And also according to their own history, they believed it had the power to take it away. The question is, do we ignore their warnings? Do we sit aside and become akin to the many communities who had settled beneath an active volcano? Those who, despite all of its warnings, disregarded the signs and only realized what could have been done to avoid their destiny when it was too late. There have been multiple events in Earth's history in which the Sun has had an effect that was noticeable enough to take heed. 3 of those events have happened since our industrial age began, and they have helped pave the way for our necessity in placing more attention to the functions of our Sun. The first was a CME, which happened on the 28th of August in 1859. Famously known as the Carrington event, for about a week, skies all over the world showed auroras. Telegraph operators received burns and shocks from their equipment. Sparks emanated from telegraph wires, and some buildings that were linked to the system burned to the ground. The second occurred between the 13th and 15th of May in 1921. A CME had created an intense geomagnetic storm. It caused what has been called the New York Railroad Storm, which shut down their signal and switching systems, preventing them from operating. Fires began popping up, and it damaged telephone and telegraph systems worldwide. Technology between the 1850s and 1920s was only in its infancy. Today we have wires on every street, behind every wall in our home, and almost attached to every product we buy. And on March 13th, 1989, we learned just what can happen if we let sleeping dogs lie. In the early morning of March 13th, at 2:44 a.m., the storm's currents had pierced through weakness within the province's power grid, and in less than 2 minutes, 6.9 million people were in the dark. We see the Sun as a tranquil and warm friend, which has allowed us to grow and prosper. But as a thermonuclear reactor, our Sun is a violent reminder that it hasn't always remained just a minor convenience in its adverse state. And ancient history tells us that this creator of life wasn't always viewed as a protector. Our history is filled with stories, passed down through generations when our balmy sphere was less than our friend. These legends reach across our entire planet, and although the sun is viewed by all, there are specific stories which lead us to believe there was something more going on than the pleasant tale of a god in its most affable state. A tribe in South America recounts the tale of a husband moon and his wife the sun. They say she fell twice. The first time the earth was saved by one of the people who caught her, but the second time she lit the forest up in a flood of fire. Revelation 7 expresses a time in which the world had almost been decimated, and those who took refuge and survived are finally emerging to carry on in the aftermath. A Cherokee myth speaks of when the sun came to see her daughter, only to discover her dead, and then flooded the earth with her tears. In China, there is the tale of Shiho and Hu Yi, who ran across the sky to make as much light as possible, believing their efforts would allow them a few days off afterwards. In their haste, they caused a major drought by drying up the rivers and burning the world. Another Cherokee myth is about an age where there were two suns. When one sun would begin to nestle behind the horizon, the other would rise, and therefore there was only day, and night did not exist. It had become so hot that the crops wouldn't grow and trees began to die. The people agreed that one sun had to go, and a party was organized to deal with the issue. When that sun had finally come up in the horizon, they drew their bows and fired their arrows. This caused that sun to release a river of hot blood, which engulfed one of the men, and he died instantly. The other two were burned, but made it back home. This myth goes on to claim that the moon is the remainder of a second sun. In South America, the Aztecs believed another race of people ruled the world, before being destroyed by what they called the first sun. They said that human existence occurred in the midst of 5 suns, and that we in our current time are housed within the 5th. The first cleansed the earth, taking with it a race that existed before, giving rise to humanity. The second sun caused hurricanes and floods, forcing people into the streets. And the third took down the world in an encompassing fire. The fourth spawned a gigantic flood, forcing people into hiding. And once more, they had to begin again after the birth of the new sun. But in order for there to be a new sun, one of the gods had to sacrifice themselves by jumping into a fire in order to ascend to immortality. The Aztecs remarked that the death of the 5th sun will end the world through earthquakes, and that people will be destroyed by monsters that will come from the sky. This tale appears to be knowledge of those who understood a greater cycle. But is there any truth to these stories? The answer to that question may lie in the auroras. The name Aurora comes to us from the Roman goddess of the morning, and Boreas, which was used as the Greek name for the north wind. This combining of words to represent the dances of light in our heaven was given to us by Galileo in the 17th century. Auroras occur when electrons and protons, which are part of the solar wind, have been released by the sun and bombard the Earth's atmosphere. Because they follow the Earth's magnetic field, it causes them to appear like ribbons in our sky. Depending on which gases the electrons and protons come into contact with, will determine a particular color. Altitude also plays a role in determining which hue they take up. Red is created through the interaction with nitrogen at 62 miles, but also when mixing with oxygen at altitudes of 186 to 248 miles. Legends surrounding the auroras also exist. Myths in Iceland associate the aurora to the spirits of the dead. One of the original inhabitants of Australia, who call the Aurora Australis Jura, tell of a group of hunters who ate the sacred emu, and due to their sin, poisonous flames in the sky came to punish them. Curiously, some Inuit cultures believed that whistling or waving to the auroras would send demons down to carry them away. Others even seen the colors of green and red as spirits who would come to behead them. So what would be attached to the auroras that would have these cultures believe that the lights would harm them?
Yeah, flood or fire. And I think that there are more or less eyewitness accounts of some of this stuff encoded in these myths and legends from around the world, be it flood or fire. I mean, and if you think about the nature of humanity, when you're in an era where it's oral tales, we're not writing things down, you don't encode just data, you deify things, you put a story and a framework around them, and that's how you pass data down through generations, and it ends up looking like it is.
One of the ways, that's one of the ways, if you have information that you wish to transmit to the future, one of the ways to transmit it is to put it into a story that people will keep on telling. And
When it comes to the displays which take us in awe as they move in the night sky, the size of the aurora is dependent on the size of the blast ejected from the sun and what is contained in its wake. A connection was made by physicist Anthony Peratt of the Los Alamos Laboratory, who noticed eerie similarities between certain petroglyphs in relation to shapes which occurred during experiments with plasma. And eerie they are. In what has become known as Squatter Man, these petroglyphs repeat themselves over the entire planet, and they have other striking comparisons. For one, and the most obvious, is that they show a resemblance too uncanny to be coincidental. Secondly, they were all drawn as if each and every one of the artisans were depicting these images while watching the event. That viewpoint happens to be towards magnetic south, and there are others representing different shapes that would have also have been in the sky. A blast the size required to create these images in our atmosphere would have been of a magnitude the likes we have never seen in this modern age. But they could happen, and according to these, they did. It's not hard to see why events of this magnitude would have spurned religions and likely be the reason why our ancestors held the sun not only in such veneration, but also to be feared. In order to understand what this means, we first have to understand the differences between what causes the pleasant lights in our night sky and those which we should be wary of. When a storm happens on the sun, loops created from plasma following the sun's magnetic field lines sometimes cross. When this happens, it causes an explosion. CMEs and solar flares are caused by the same thing, the crossing of these loops. And any blast from the sun, whether it's a CME or solar flare, emits radiation. This includes gamma rays and X-rays. But that's where the commonalities between them end. Solar flares contain radiation and the elements which create light, and normally take about 8 minutes to reach us. CMEs carry plasma and magnetic field, the heavier luggage, and take around 16 hours to enter our atmosphere. We had once likened them, for a while, to an atomic blast, the CME being the blast that causes a crater and sends debris outward, while the solar flare would be the shock wave. But scientists have been discovering as more data comes in that this isn't the case, and that differences between them are more stark than what we had originally believed. New information has also come out about the sun's magnetic field lines. It was once believed that these lines unfurled in a linear fashion and spread out evenly. But it was recently discovered that these lines change direction intermittently, and it's not understood why. What we do know is that the frequency of solar flares and CMEs line up with the sun's 11-year cycle. Astronomers at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Massachusetts calculated the information received from a study of 84 stars, which come close in similarity to our own, and they discovered superflares can occur around every 350 years. There is also evidence of past events in tree rings and ice cores. It's been discovered that we've had at least 3 major events in the last 10,000 years. But there could be more, and it is likely that others will be found as we dig farther back. There has also recently been an observation of Betelgeuse. That sun blew a chunk off its surface that was 400 billion times the strength of a CME from our own sun. It is estimated that the event occurred in 2019. And although Betelgeuse is so large that it would encompass our solar system with its outer corona touching Saturn, if we keep scale in mind, an episode like this from our own sun would be cataclysmic. Compared to our sun, Betelgeuse is an elderly star, and this just may be the grunts and groans of old age. But until we learn more about what our own star is capable of, we cannot rule anything out. When it comes to the blasts from our sun, they are still only a fragment of the sun's role on our planet. Together with the moon, the sun affects our tides, and that also has repercussions on the oceans of lava beneath our feet. It plays a major role in our weather, and thus can make it both rain in some areas while drying up rivers and lakes in others. The most violent times of a sun are its creation and destruction, but while we're here at some time in between, events are taking place that are cause for concern. A CME of the same strength as the Carrington event was launched from the Sun in 2012. It missed us by only 9 days. Due to our dependence on electrical devices, we know that something that size could have devastating consequences. Those who were part of the Carrington event spoke of operators receiving shocks that marred their skin, and it was also reported to have caused fires. In those days, they had basic copper lines. Today, things are a lot more complicated. Take for a moment and think about the amount of electronic devices you have in your home, which are constantly running while you're away at work. The computer that's in sleep mode, your fridge and freezer. Think about your stove and other items which you believe are off but still powers a digital clock. The cell phone in your pocket, and the amount of electronics required to operate your vehicle. The question is, how much time would have to pass before we reach a point where we can no longer slip back into the comfortable existence we once had? If we were hit by something on par, or a bit larger than the Carrington event, we could experience something like this. You're sitting at home, and all of a sudden the power goes out. You sit tight, thinking it'll be back on within the next few hours, but it doesn't. You notice there's no water coming from your tap, and the toilet stops flushing. By evening, everything in your freezer has almost thawed, and the inside of your fridge is warm. You step outside and see fires in the distance all around you. But with the lack of communications, most are left to burn. The hospitals have been downgraded to hands-on care, and ambulance services that you have come to rely on can no longer receive calls, leaving those in need of assistance on their own. Police are preoccupied in the business sectors as looting rises from those taking advantage of the situation. Oil lines are no longer operating, grocery stores have sent their people home, and all delivery services have stopped functioning. The ATMs and banks which you have relied on cannot issue a dime, as all of their tasks rely on computer systems. Eventually, if no arrangement is in place to feed, entertain, and offer other basic needs while we wait it out, people will end up taking from each other in order to survive. And when this happens, it's too late. All of our major infrastructure relies on electricity, and others which we don't consider have electrical systems built in for other functions, like the cooling systems for nuclear power plants. Even if we could avoid the electrical sparks and prevent fires, our lives would still be affected drastically. But our enemy wouldn't just be the interruption of our infrastructure. It would be the amount of time it would take in order to fix what was damaged and turn everything back on. While there is new tech which is allowing our electric grids to be more resilient, they are not impervious to harm, and power companies who have been tasked with solving the situation have determined that the best course of action is early warning. It would also be well to mention that certain types of rock many power lines are placed over can boost DC currents, making them more volatile and up to 100 times more destructive to our AC lines. So much of our lives are incorporated into this system that everything we recognize as our way of life could be grounded to a halt. With what we know of the activity produced by the sun in our current history, there are also clues which may point to the sun being the influencer of the last great flood.
Okay. Now, Dr. Shaw, cue us in on what is going on with solar burst and what it's all about.
Well, right now, we are seeing a situation where the sun is becoming very erratic, very volatile, and this is a situation that's been developing in the last 50 to 100 years. Before that, the sun was relatively stable, relatively calm for thousands of years. Where this ties in with my research is that pushing back the age of civilization with my work on the Sphinx and work in Turkey and other work that I've been doing, we'll talk about at the conference, we find that there was an earlier cycle of civilization that was absolutely devastated by natural cataclysms caused by a really major solar outburst at the end of the last ice age. This caused incredible heating of the atmosphere, changes in climates, set off all kinds of catastrophic effects on the surface of the Earth. Now, I don't want to be a fear monger. I don't want to scare people, but we have to look at real evidence.
Right.
And the real evidence from isotopic analysis, from ice cores, from sediment cores, all kinds of data, is that the sun goes through periods of being very volatile, very erratic, then it essentially calms down for thousands of years, but then it starts getting erratic again. That's what's happening.
This too, if it is the case, could be a potential repeater. But is there anything being done to give us an advance warning so that we can not only avoid a large-scale blackout, but have a chance to survive through a larger event? Due to events such as Carrington and the Quebec blackout, scientists have been trying to get ahead of the game and learn as much as they can about the sun in order to protect ourselves from another hazard. SOHO, the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, departed our planet in 1995. Its mission was to gather images and other data from the sun. It was commissioned for only 3 years, but due to its success, it has remained employed to this day and celebrated its 25th anniversary in 2020. It is stationed 1.5 million miles from the Earth. On October 26, 2006, 2 spacecraft were sent to orbit the Sun. STEREO, the Solar Terrestrial Relations Observatory, was a mission to study CMEs. It was originally commissioned to gain more knowledge on solar eruptions through imaging and background events while being in different orbits around the Sun. STEREO B was lost until eventually found in 2016. After 2 years of trying to gain control of the satellite, NASA terminated the rescue mission in September of 2018. STEREO A is still operational and continues to relay data back to us to this day. In February of 2010, the SDO was sent up to orbit our planet. As it follows our own rotation, it provides data on the magnetic field, seismic waves, and the atmosphere. The Parker Solar Probe was launched on August 12th of 2018. It was built to collect information on the Sun's outer corona. The craft uses Venus for momentum and will be taking advantage of the planet for a total of 7 years, each time bringing itself closer to the Sun. That probe is the only spacecraft to come closer to the Sun than any other, and entered just within the Sun's corona on April 28, 2021. Aboard all of these are instruments that are aiding in our fight to understand as much about the Sun as we can, and the scientists and researchers behind them think of nothing else than to answer the biggest question of all. What will our Sun do next? We know our best bet to prepare for a solar storm is by getting an advance warning. At the moment, current models can only predict solar flares within half an hour to an hour. But there is push to extend that time. A team of scientists had come together and were hard at work to try and give us more time before solar flares and CMEs could encounter our atmosphere. Fast forward to 2019, and they did just that. Jeffrey Hughes, director of Boston University's Center for Integrated Space Weather Modeling, and his team created a prediction model which will give us 2 to 3 days advanced warning. But they have yet to figure out the direction of the magnetic field. This will take some time, but with enough effort and funding, it can be done. And yet we are finding with new information that there's a new type of solar storm that can hit us without notice. This particular solar event had implications on low-flying satellites. On February 3rd, SpaceX had 40 of their satellites fall and burn up into our atmosphere because a storm had reached us without warning. Another hit the Earth between the days of June 25th and 26th. Even though this storm was weak, it was able to avoid detection. We're not where we need to be yet, but we are getting there. As we are reaching the peak of the Sun's 11-year cycle, the necessity to bring greater funding into these programs is paramount. And the importance behind this research could save us billions in the future, and in the case of a potential brutal storm, could save us. While scientists are hard at work trying to figure out how to predict these storms, is there anything we can do at home to protect ourselves? Today, we've built entire industries around keeping us warm in the winter, cool in the summer, and dry when we're out in rainy weather. We prepare for bad weather in the builds of our structures to protect us from the onslaught of nature's fury. With research towards the production of new technologies, such as impact-resistant windows to deal with hurricanes, better insulation for colder climates, and designs into houses which are tornado-proof. Of those technologies, there are some which have been created with a different type of weather in mind. A NASA engineer is hard at work in creating a new type of surge protector which will guard one's entire home. While there are surge protectors to safeguard against lightning and power line surges, they don't provide the shielding one would need against those sent to us by the sun. Dr. Arthur Bradley is developing one which could. There are also materials which have been created to protect your devices from turning into paperweights. Michael Faraday was an English scientist who set the stage into understanding the electromagnetic field in physics. He had many achievements, but the important one for this case was diamagnetism. In layman's terms, it's a specific material that creates a barrier between it and electromagnetic fields. From this, Faraday cages were created. Using these specific materials, companies have adopted them into cases, bags, and other enclosed structures to protect our electrical devices. Krzysztof Lewandowski of the Wrocław University of Technology in Poland wrote a paper in 2016 about how important it is for the scientific community to come together and work on a smart city. Detailing the potential threats to our infrastructure in a bid to secure the minds of our intellects, he offers a way to find solutions which would allow us to continue living with electricity, even with the potential risks from our sun. If an event such as the one which produced the petroglyphs and rock carvings were to happen today, it would alter our lives to a point where everything we have managed to accomplish would be wiped. A storm of this enormity would damage our atmosphere where it would no longer be able to protect us from harmful radiation. But there are certain caves and rock structures we may have to thank for the survival of our ancestors. Testing for the best natural rocks to prevent radiation exposure in labs and for other applications, a study was conducted and published in the National Library of Medicine. They discovered that olivine basalt, jet black granite, limestone, sandstone, and dolerite are more beneficial than current industrial shielding. These rocks would have been the ideal safety net to weather the storm. In the event we would face a storm which would affect our atmosphere in this way, we may look towards using what protected our ancestors, if the time ever comes. While the next major event may not be of the level which would have us running into caves while life-threatening radiation is raining down, it is always best to keep the worst case in mind. In that way, we have the best chance at succeeding into our future. Our ancestors seen the sun as the bringer and destroyer of the world. We know their views of the star as a creator were due to a stable climate in which the sun acted as a welcoming friend. But in order for them to view the sun as a destroyer, they would have had to have lived through an event which was detrimental enough to have them create stories which they deemed important enough to be handed down. In our efforts to learn about the vital force in our solar system, we are on track to one day understand the nature of our sun, and with luck, not end up as those who ignored the signs of smoke from the towering mountain above them, only to become another legend passed down for another age to repeat.